Hey everyone. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sabbath Gift. We're so excited that you can join us here this evening. For our new guests, we'd love to welcome you here. We're so excited to have you joining us. And for our repeated guests, it's so exciting to have you guys here as well. We have been blessed with some amazing talks over the last couple of Friday nights, and we are so excited that you're here with us now for this next talk. Erin, what have we heard in the last couple of talks?
So this is our fourth session, and on that first night, we did hear from Dr. Christiana Lamina, who was presenting about the health benefits of the Sabbath.
Yes.
And then we got to hear from Pastor Brendan Pratt about what it means to disconnect from this busy and hurried world. And then last Friday night, Nathan Brown and Pastor Moy Stiles presented about social justice and about rediscovering community and connection within that gift of the Sabbath.
I got to say, I have loved the talks. I've taken something from every single one of them. And so for our new guests, I would strongly encourage you, if you missed any, to go back and re-watch them because you will be blessed by them. They're fantastic. But we also have in our talks, we have this chat function, and we would love for you guys to interact with it. Communicate with us, connect with us, and tell us, where are you guys tuning in from? Erin, where are we?
So we are not in Australia tonight. In fact, we are tuning in from Christchurch, New Zealand. We're on the tail end of an amazing holiday over here, and we are so looking forward to going through thousands of photos that we've taken over the last few weeks.
We have.
And so blessed to be in this part of our division. So if you do need assistance viewing tonight's webinar, please log into Zoom using the meeting ID that's coming up on your screen, and then select captions to help you view tonight's episode.
We don't want you guys to miss a single thing. Now, in reflection to our last week's talk, it was an amazing talk. And I got to say, one of my things that I took away about social justice and community was that the Sabbath should be a benefit to the community. It shouldn't just be personal, but it should be something that helps everyone.
Absolutely. I really appreciated how Nathan and Moy were talking about the Sabbath brings equality for those who can't speak up for themselves. So those who are underprivileged or vulnerable, and even the animals are protected within the gift of the Sabbath too.
Yeah, and I also really appreciated this idea that the principle that we see permeating the Sabbath isn't just to be for one day, but it should impact on all 6 days, all 7 days.
Absolutely. It's so true. It's not just a one day a week, but those principles continue on. So we hope that you have been enjoying taking up the Sabbath challenge. It's been such a blessing for us, particularly throughout the month of July, to have this increased awareness. And we hope that you are feeling healthier and happier and more connected and more in tune with God as well as you've experienced this Sabbath gift.
Now, once again, as we talked about with the chat function, if you guys have any questions for our speaker tonight, we would encourage you to put them into the chat so that we can have you interacting with him.
Absolutely. So our speaker tonight is Robbie Berghan. It is so good to have you here, Robbie. Welcome.
Hello.
Hey, so you've got quite some paraphernalia around. Tell us a bit about your backdrop there, and your mic just looks so much cooler than our lack of mic. What are we doing?
Well, this is a Faith FM studio, a regional studio up here in Queensland. Faith FM is a Christian radio station that runs right across Australia, and I'm the national content manager for it, and I'm one of the speakers and host of many shows on Faith FM, so hence the paraphernalia.
That is fabulous. Robbie, as I was reading a bit about who you are, I understand that your walk with experimenting with your faith in God really took a leap after 9/11.
Absolutely. That was the catalyst, as they say. There's two things leading up to that, and then the third thing was September 11, 2001, and that was basically the thing that put me on the trajectory that led me to starting the faith experiment, as in my own journey to faith. And ultimately, it's the backdrop for the podcast that I host here on Faith FM.
That's unreal. So with Faith FM, people can tune in, obviously, via a radio station. Can you tell us what that station is? And is there a way, using our phones, that we can also tune in via an app?
Yeah, absolutely. So Faith FM reaches about 5 million people around Australia. Depending where you live, it's different frequencies. We have 3 main frequencies you operate on. The easiest way to find it is to go to faithfm.com.au and just look on the map and see where you are, zoom in, you'll get the frequencies in your area. But probably the easiest way is to get the Faith FM app. So you just go to your app store, whether you're Google or Apple, and type in Faith FM Radio Australia, and you will find the app there. Super simple. You can listen to it live from your phone or on demand. All the different shows and podcasts are all available through the app as a basically a feature within the program. So it's pretty cool.
Awesome.
Unreal. Robbie, I understand that your background is not in radio, but in fact in engineering, in computer science, and religion, studying world religions. That's quite a blend. We are so looking forward to your presentation tonight. Thank you for taking the time to join us. And we do encourage our listeners and viewers, if you do have questions, Robbie is happy to shoot from the hip and accept them as he's presenting tonight. And then we'll go through any that aren't answered during the presentation at the end. So thanks so much, Robbie. Over to you.
Thanks, Trent and Aaron. It's great to be here. I'm hoping the technology works, because just before I had a bit of a mild heart attack when I disappeared and you guys were frozen in time. So I'm hoping this all works. As you guys said, I love getting feedback from a live audience. We do shows on radio all day, every day, and nothing beats it than getting some input. So as we go through, as you said, as we go through this conversation, looking forward to seeing the comments come in. I'm not sure how they actually do this, but I'm assuming it's through some chat function wherever they're watching this from. Love to have your comments come through. So I've been asked today to talk about the Sabbath gift in terms of the spiritual side of it, or the biblical side of it. There's been some excellent hosts over the last couple of Friday nights. Had a chance to catch up on a few of them. And the cool one, the one that stands out to me, was the health benefits and the comparison with the cell phone, because I've used that myself. And I was going to use it tonight, but since I saw that the previous presenters talked about the connection of the Sabbath and the parallel to the cell phone, I'm not going to use it tonight, even though it's a really cool one to explore. So let's get into our exploration for tonight. So as we've already sort of hinted at, I didn't come from a faith background. I called myself an atheist, or now I refer to myself previously in my past life as a non-believer. But now I call myself a faith experimenter. And there's good reason for that, because I'm not a person that believes that faith is just something that you just have and it just works somehow mystically. I believe that there's evidence for faith, and that's why I'm about experimenting with it. So as you guys gave me that nice little introduction, I did start my career in civil engineering, and my real passion was computers and programming. But when I was in high school, my guidance counselor said, that's a really dumb idea. There's no future in IT in Australia. You'd have to go work for NASA. And so they said, what's your second best interest for an area? And I chose engineering. I liked the idea of engineering. So I went to civil engineering, and about 4 years into that, it turns out that IT was actually a good bet. And because I had an interest in it, I sort of started doing IT work in engineering fields, and then eventually went and did engineering degrees. And then I became a follower of Jesus, and that changed my life again. And I went and studied theology, and I did a master's in world religions. I spent a lot of time traveling around the world, studying in different cultures, learning the different ancient religions and seeing parallels and finding context for that today. My favorite place of all time to live was in Taiwan, and studying the Asian religions. Now, what's all of that got to do with the Sabbath tonight? Well, I'm glad that nobody has asked that yet. If you did, I would be thrilled to give you a shout out. So text us in, message us in, how you're going to do it. Now, by the way, I should tell you, at the end of this episode, I have a great giveaway to give you. It's a book called The Sabbath Gift, a faith experiment. So if you want to get your free copy of this, stick around to the end of this webinar, I think they're calling it, and we'll give you a code word to text in to get your free copy of this book. So I came across God. That sounds kind of weird now, but I sort of came across God in the wake of September 11 in a quest to understand what religions believe about God. Because September 11 had happened, there was a war on terror, there was the American Christians against the Islamic extremists, and there's this constant perception of a holy war. So I started studying these ancient manuscripts in all these different religions, in Islam, in the Vedas from the Hindu text. I've studied the Buddhist text, and obviously the Old Testament and New Testament, or the Greek and Hebrew text of Christianity. And long story short, I discovered in the biblical manuscripts that there was evidence for God, testable evidence. And that's where the faith experiment begins in my own life. Now, that's a whole nother story. You can go check out podcasts for that on Faith FM about the faith experiment. But what I want to talk about tonight is that of all the teachings in the Bible, so whether it be the Old Testament or the New Testament, of all of those teachings, and there's literally hundreds of teachings in Scripture, the one that's the most tangible, that's most physical, that's most experiential is the Sabbath. Because there's a teaching about what happens after you die, for example, right? Pretty hard to experience that one on a regular basis, right? There's a teaching about what heaven will be like. There's a teaching about how to be saved from sin. There's all these sorts of teachings, and they're all very, very important, but none of them are very tangible in terms of what you can do with every single day of your life, so to speak, except believe in it. So of all the teachings I've discovered in the Bible, the teaching about the Sabbath, and the Sabbath gift, as I like to refer to it as, it's the most tangible because you get to experience it right here, right now, in real time. So there's a text in the Bible in the book of Psalms. It's chapter 34, verse 8, I think it is. And it says, along these lines, it says, taste and see that God is good, right? That's the principle. It's experiment it. See if it works. See if it's good. See if it's not good. Experiment with it. That's sort of the premise that I have based a lot of my experimentation in Scripture and faith on. So this whole Sabbath thing is something that when I discovered it, I decided to experiment with it. So let me give you some context. If you've never heard of the Sabbath, you've never studied what the Sabbath is about, you've never explored it from a religious perspective, I guess, I want to talk about some of those things tonight, right? So here's the first thing. My personality is I am naturally a workaholic, and that's not a good thing. I'm not putting it out there as to wear a new badge or something. A workaholic's not a great thing, right? But that's just how I'm wired. If I'm not doing something, I will create something to do. I've got to constantly do things. And my wife is frustrated no ends because we can be sitting at dinner and it's a nice romantic night, and she's looking into my eyes and I'm looking in her eyes. But while I'm looking into her eyes, I'm thinking of all the things that I need to do as soon as we're done with this, or all the things that I could have done better from what I did today. I'm constantly wired that way, right? And so in my basically my faith experiment, I discovered that there's this idea in the Scriptures that humans, surprise, surprise, need regular rest to function and to be sustainable. And we've talked about that over the last couple of webinars on things like the physical benefits of rest, the emotional benefits, the environmental benefits, all those sorts of benefits. But the one that's probably the most overlooked is the spiritual benefits of this rest. So I discovered probably about, 18 years ago, that this whole idea of, by the way, I haven't said this, I'm sure if you've been following these webinars for the last couple of weeks, you'll know that the word Sabbath is a Hebrew word which literally translates into English as the rest. It's like not a rest, it's the rest, right? And this concept is embedded in Scripture from pretty much page 1. The idea that rest, we're wired for it, we need it. And so in this quest of experimenting with faith and the teachings of these ancient manuscripts, I discovered, surprise, surprise, that we actually need rest to be optimal in our performance mentally, intellectually, physically, emotionally, socially, and even for me, even for someone that's sort of wired to want to be always productive and always working and all these sorts of things. So let's sort of peel back a few concepts of the Sabbath idea. So God places this in the opening passages and opening pages of the Hebrew manuscripts. There's a book called Genesis. You probably all heard of it. And in chapter 2, the second chapter, so chapter 1's all about creating the world. In the second chapter, God just drops this whole Sabbath idea onto us in terms of the world. And this is before there's any taint of bad, negativity, sin, suffering, pain. It's all before that. So before there's anything bad in the universe, we are given this concept of there's something about rest, this idea of a Sabbath. And what's fascinating to me is that before it even becomes a thing, discovering it as a human perspective or being taught it from a human perspective, God decides to not teach it, but to model it. So in the biblical account, the very first indication we get about the Sabbath is it says that God rests on the seventh day and he sets it aside. He sets it apart. The Hebrew word we use is sanctified. He sanctifies it. He puts it aside. And he says, this is a part of the 7 days, but this day is different. It's special. And then he models what he does with that day. It says that he rests from his work and that he just sort of embraces this idea of looking back and reflecting on what's been done versus what he has done and what he can do and what he will do. So it's not that God needs rest. Like, that's not the point here. The point is, I think God's trying to model to us how he wants us to relate to the rest. He wants us to enter into this space and be reflective, introspective. And this is one of the spiritual benefits that a lot of people, even people who observe the Sabbath and celebrate the Sabbath, they actually neglect it. They think it's about, the physical downtime, which it is, because God does that. But God didn't need the physical downtime. God is modeling to us that, yeah, that's good for you, but there's something more to that. So let's unpack that idea a little bit more. When you go into the next scroll or book of the ancient manuscripts, it's called the book of Exodus. When you get to chapter 16, there's this really remarkable story, right? So God brings the children of Israel out of Egypt. He brings them into wilderness, and there they're sort of resting with him in this wilderness experience. And so they cry out for food. They're like, how are we going to eat out here? There's so many of us. There's no food, blah, 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 blah. And so God makes this point. He says, I'm going to provide for you, all right? And I'm going to provide for you this thing called manna. It's like, what is this? That's what it literally means out of Hebrew into English. What is this thing? It's like kind of like a wafer sort of thing. And God basically says, I'm going to pour this thing out every day. You'll get enough for you to collect and have food for yourself, right? But then God says, I'm working a miracle for 6 days, but on the 7th day, I'm resting. I'm not even going to work my miracle on the 7th day. I'll give you double the portion on the 6th day. So double miracle on the 6th day so that you can rest with me on the 7th day. Now, this miracle process, it continues on for about 40 years, right? So, and this is before there's any 10 commandments. There's not a single 10 commandment at this point, because it was understood from creation that God had built into this time once a week where it was going to be a full 24-hour period entering into a rest. And yes, there's the physical side of it, there's the social side of it, but there's the spiritual side to it, because God's making the point, I'm not even going to work the miracle on the 7th day. I'm going to spend that time communing with you and you communing with me. So there's this recharging in a supernatural sense, not just like shut your eyes and don't work for 24 hours, physical sense. So there's this really interesting thing being developed. I call it the Sabbath thread in Scripture. It goes from Genesis right through to the last book in Revelation, this thread of the rest. And it's always connecting God and us together. It's not just about the sleep and the lack of work. It's about the connecting between God and us. So you get a couple of more chapters into the book of Exodus, and you find the 10 Commandments story, which you're probably all familiar with. You've seen a movie at some point about it. And God gives us those 10 commandments on 2 tables of stone. And on commandment number 4, so the first 4 commandments are all about our relationship with God, and the last 6 are all about our relationship with each other as humans. The first 3 are like things like there's only one God, don't have any other gods, don't make idols, don't take God's name in vain. When he gets to the 4th commandment, this is where God codifies this idea that we are to enter into this weekly rest on the 7th day. Every 7 days, this cycle happens where we recharge spiritually, all right? Now, what's fascinating when you study this law, this 10 commandments, right? One of them, the 4th one, the Sabbath one, is the only one that starts differently to every other one. What do I mean by that? All the 10 commandments start with, you shall not, or thou shalt not have any other gods before me. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord in vain. Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not lie. But when it gets to the Sabbath one, it's the only one that does it this way. It says, remember the seventh day. Remember the Sabbath day. Remember, it's a holy time of communion between me and you. It's a holy day to reflect on creative power. It's holy. Remember it. Now, many scholars have seen that in this idea, when God's emphasizing remember the seventh day and this sort of appointment with Him each week, if we remember that one, every other one, so the other remaining 9 ones, will take care of themselves. If you remember to spend that time recharging with God spiritually, then you're not going to, if you're connecting with God this way, then you're not going to be worried it's not so dangerous for you to go kill someone. It's not so dangerous for you to go lie to someone because you're connecting with God. So because you have that charging experience, supernatural charging experience with God, then you're sort of free from the rest of the commandments. It's a very interesting concept, and it takes a bit of time to continue studying that out. But it's fascinating that of all the commandments that God codified, this was the only one that He told us to actively do. The rest of them we were told not to do. So pretty interesting. Now, when you go further into the Old Testament manuscripts, so these are what we call the Dead Sea Scrolls, this collection that, literally thousands of years old, we get to a book called Ezekiel, and in that book, again, following that Sabbath thread, what God says is profound. God makes this statement in chapter 20, and He makes a couple of times in the chapter. But He makes this point. He says, remember to observe the Sabbath. That means enter into this time. It's to guard the time is the best translation in English, probably. When you guard this seventh day time, this gift of rest with God, God says that it will be a sign. So the Sabbath, this act of resting in Him, spiritually, physically, socially, environmentally, all that sort of stuff. When we engage in that with Him, what we're actually doing, He says, is a sign. We're actually experiencing this token, this symbol, the seal, the sign. And what He says it's a sign that He is our God and we are His creatures, His creation, His children. So He makes the point that as we as heaven and earth in the form of God and humans, as we come into alignment on the seventh day cycle and we enter into that space together, we touch heaven and earth together in that Sabbath temple of time. He says by doing that is when we get our sense of identity in God. God tells us, hey, I'm your God and you're my people because we're connecting on the seventh day cycle. It's absolutely a beautiful picture. And the thing it did for me when I started studying this out, like nearly 18, 19 years ago, was it showed me that God is relational. So God's not just some arbitrary guy up there, big guy with lightning bolts, make sure you do the right thing or else. He makes this point of illustrating that this is a relational time that He wants to engage with us. And by connecting and aligning together, what we end up with is an amazing sense of identity and purpose. And so imagine this. Let's say you're struggling to know who you are and what your purpose is in life, right? So you're struggling on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday comes, and on Friday evening is when this Sabbath cycle kicks in. So we come into alignment with heaven on that cycle. It's at that time that we get that centering, that earthing, if you want to call it that, into who and what God is and who and what we are to God. And now we know who we are again. So then we go out of that space onto the Sunday, which is the first day of the week, and we go to the week again. So it's kind of this recentering every single 7-day cycle for us to know who God is and for us to know who we are in God. Now, when I first realized that the Sabbath was a big deal, it wasn't just something for the ancient world. It was something that God had intended for humans. And as long as you identify as a human, it's kind of a big deal for us, this Sabbath thing, according to the biblical manuscripts. Now, when I first grasped this whole thing, my first sense was intrigue. Imagine what would happen Now, this was back like 2002, 2003, right? When I first was going down this thought process. I thought to myself, what would happen if I actually experimented with this ancient manuscript and this teaching of this Sabbath rest and this 7-day cycle every Saturday, basically? What would happen? What would be the impact in my life? That was my thought, right? And so I thought, it was kind of hard because on one side, it feels like I'm going to be less productive because I'm a super productive person. I'll be less productive by taking a whole day off every single week. But on the flip side, these manuscripts seem to indicate that if I do that, I'm going to be centered in knowing who I am and what God is. And then God takes care of the rest. Because there's a text that says, if we seek first God and his kingdom, God takes care of the detail. This is in the Gospel of Matthew. So I thought I'll try it. But I have to say this. The first problem that I had, or I faced, or challenge I faced with the Sabbath, is that we live in a super modern world compared to, nomadic people living in tents and, traveling around as the herds move around. We live in a different world. Even back, in early 2000s, it was a different world. And today it's gotten even worse. Right now we have social media, we have everything's in real time. How do you actually disconnect from everything and just connect with the divine every 7 days? Like, that was the biggest challenge. And so what I found was I had to be clear in my mind what I wanted, because I had employers who would say, hey, Friday night, can you work back late? Or Saturday, can you come in early in the morning? Or Saturday night, I need you to do this. And basically, because I'm super productive, I want to get things done. I'm like, yeah. Okay, cool. I'll do it. But I had to come to a point, and at first it was hard, but now it's super easy. Like, I didn't have to think twice about it. I have committed to this experiment of every seventh day. I'm no matter what happens, I'm connecting with God. And the minute I started making it a priority and I put it in my calendar, like, nope, that's my busy time with God, right? When I started doing that, everything started to fall into place. And it's almost like you got to take a bit of time in seeing how serious you are with it. And once you get over that little hurdle, you never go back. I could never go back to not keeping a 7th-day cycle, because it's absolutely fascinating how life changes when you place your priority on connecting a 7-day cycle. Because here's it, right? In the ancient manuscripts, the biblical secret of basically, I don't want to say it this way, but I will. To see positive change in your life, there's only one secret to the ancient manuscripts, and that's by beholding God. We change, this is biblical teaching, we change by beholding God, right? And you go, well, how do I behold God that I can't see? You enter into the Sabbath rest. You enter into a time of what we call spending time with God each day is devotional time. But primarily it comes from spending a committed time each chunk of the week, which is the 7th day, and beholding God. And it's as a result of that, in my own life experience, that I have seen the most tremendous change in my life. Like, people who knew me back in the day, I was into martial arts, I was into all the substances of stuff that people are probably still playing around with. I was into the music scene, I was into all these different scenes. And I wasn't a happy person. I wasn't a nice person. I was an arrogant person. I was a very foul-mouthed person. I was all these different things. But I put it down to connecting with God and investing in the relationship with God, which he asked for, not me. I didn't ask for it. He asked for it. So I said, I'll experiment with it. And as I started this process with him, it has been tremendous on the results that I have seen. So I guess if you're watching this, you're kind of interested, right? You're wondering what's the benefit of a 21st century person engaging with this ancient tradition. Well, first of all, who says it's ancient? It is ancient in that it was given at the beginning, but it hasn't ended. It's never ended. It's been going every 7 days. It's there, a time and space that God has given to align with him, to connect with him. And so my advice to you, if you're sitting there and you're watching this or listening to this and you're thinking, it can't be as good as what Robbie's saying. I mean, surely just spending one day doing nothing can't change your life, can it? Well, I'm going to tell you it can. By connecting with God once a week on the day that he designates, I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to tell you that it is life-changing. It's transforming. You've already heard the health benefits, the social benefits. You've heard the environmental benefits, the justice benefits. You heard all those benefits. But I'm telling you right now, there is a supernatural spiritual benefit by putting God first and saying, God, you want to make a date with me on the seventh day? I'm there. Come hell or high water, as they say, I'm there. Now, you say, that's all sounds fictitious and fanciful, Robbie. Well, let me challenge you. I challenge you to try it. As the scriptures say, taste and see if it's good. So I would encourage you, I think over the last couple of weeks, you've been challenged to try out the Sabbath, to put yourself into a Sabbath challenge and just see for yourself what will actually happen. On the screen right now, they're giving you a link. You can sign up. You can do the challenge with other people. You can join a community talking about this, the benefits of the Sabbath, what you have experienced. It's an ongoing experiment. And I have found that some of my greatest days in my life in the last 18, 19 years has been because of my Sabbath challenge. So, guys, I'm going to hand back to our trusty host,
Hey,
Aaron
Robbie.
and Trent. You know, on the screen, your names are around the opposite way of the way you're sitting. So it's kind of frustrating. It says Trent and Aaron, but I'm looking at you and it's Aaron and Trent.
Quick, swap. we got it right last week.
We've done it. We've been really intentional, and last one, we messed it up. So sorry about that, Robbie.
That's all right. We still love you guys.
Well, I was going to say, Robbie, thank you so much. Loved your talk. It was amazing. And I love how you personally took up the Sabbath challenge on your own journey. And thank you for sharing that and how it was a blessing to you.
It was amazing as well how you made the point about like making an appointment with God and really protecting that time. Because if you don't guard that, then it's so easy for other things to come in and to, crowd out that. And you're like, oh, I'll just, I'll do the Sabbath later. But you really made it a priority.
I looked at it this way. In my early 20s, when all this started happening in my life, I would never miss a date with a girl. Like it was in the calendar, it was all booked. I wasn't going to miss it, right? Doesn't matter how much money I had to miss out on, I was going to go on that date. How much more to experiment with connecting with the supernatural, with the divine. Yeah. So to me, it became a no-brainer. I'm going to put it in my calendar, block it out. I don't put it in the calendar anymore. I mean, I'm over that part. I know it's coming. I'm counting down. My whole life is centered around the 7-day cycle.
Yeah.
It's like,
how good is it?
Yeah. And it's like, okay, so right now we've entered into that part of the week, right? So this is my time with God now. And I can tell you after tomorrow's over, I'll be looking in my reference point of, okay, that Sabbath's done. What's the next one coming? What's happened between now and then? So my whole life now is centered around the 7-day cycle. And it is tremendous. I'm more productive now than ever before.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Praise God. I also loved how you brought out this point that in Commandment 4, when you remember the Sabbath, everything else kind of takes care of itself. Because you are much less likely to do all those things that God's like, hey, that one's not good for you or for humanity. Just that whole centering that when you put God first, everything else sorts itself out.
Yeah, I also really appreciated this idea that God didn't need rest, but he modeled it. Like he didn't just tell us to do it. He's like, no, I'll show you and I will meet you there. Like I'll be there waiting.
It's a beautiful picture, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because like so many people, like I've met a lot of people who challenge me. They're like, you're just trying to be a Pharisee. You're trying to go back to like a bondage scene. I'm like, have you experimented with the Sabbath? Because I haven't experienced the bondage of it. In fact, when I look at, like exactly what you just pointed out, when I look at what God does, he didn't even tell me to keep it. He showed me how to keep it and then the benefits of it and then gave it to me. I mean, when I say me, I mean all of humans, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes. And it really is transformational. You yourself saw, your own like pre-Sabbath keeping Robbie versus now Sabbath keeping Robbie. And it really did shape the way that you spoke to other people, the behaviors that you did, the things that you listened to and watched. And it really gives God an opportunity to speak into our lives and to mold us to be kingdom ready. Because I think in heaven we'll be doing Sabbath at its peak. It will be like championing it.
Yeah, that's a lot of people ask that question. They say, the Sabbath was just for the Jews, for example, right? And it's got an expiration date when Jesus shows up. Well, if you actually spend some time reading the ancient manuscripts before Jesus shows up, it paints a picture, especially in the book of Isaiah, that the Sabbath cycle continues on in the new world, the new heaven, wherever you want to go, wherever you want to see in the future, however you want to describe it. For eternity, it's still going to be there. So this idea that somehow it's all sort of got this expiration date, it's just not there. So I'm like racking up my Sabbaths now because you'll never run out of them. But I want to have a good start with them before we get to the eternity side of it.
Absolutely. Robbie, we've had a couple of questions come through in the chat while you've been presenting, and we just want to invite our viewers as well. If something that Robbie has said has triggered a question for you, now is the time to write it in and let's ask him straight up. Robbie, one of the questions that has come through is, how do you prepare for this Sabbath?
Excellent question. And look, there are some things that God lays out there to prepare, and there's a whole bunch of things that people do in terms of like family traditions or as in communities of faith tradition. But if you look at, I'll just give you one big one from a biblical perspective, and then I'll give you one from a personal perspective, right? So from a biblical perspective, what God has said is the best way to prepare for the Sabbath is to get rid of all the distractions that would take away from the blessing of spending time with him. And so that's in the form of, hey, if you can keep from cleaning your house on Sabbath, do it on Friday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. If you can keep from having to cook a 3-course meal on Sabbath, do it on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. If you can, basically the idea is this: whatever you can do in order to make the Sabbath date. I like one of the listeners just put here, Sabbath date with God. Love it. I think that's Marissa. Awesome. That's an awesome way to put it. Whatever you can do to prepare for that date, that's the biblical mandate. Do what you can do to prepare it so that when you enter into it, there's no distraction. That's the big picture principle, right? So on a personal level, in my home, I got 2 little kids. I got almost 8-year-old and a 2-year-old, and we have a tradition where we normally like to make a big deal about Sabbath opening on Friday nights, and so we have a special meal on Friday nights. We normally sit around and sing some songs. We do some Bible stories, and then we have a little ritual. And I think someone here mentioned about candles. We normally light a candle. We have 4 of us in the sin sort of thing, and it's this big deal for little kids. They love it, and so that's one of the ways we do an.
That's awesome. Sounds like a lovely way to start out and get the family all involved in it. We did have a question that came through, and we'll throw it back up for you there, Robbie. And they were asking, why don't we have to keep the annual Sabbaths?
The annual Sabbath.
Okay, good question from Ryan, it looks like. So there's 2 types of Sabbaths. Now, it can sound confusing in English, but if you read it in Hebrew, it's not confusing. So, like I said before, the word Sabbath means rest, right? So there's the weekly rest, and then there are annual rest, or the best way to describe it is holidays. So we get the idea of a holiday is a day off, right? In Hebrew, if you translate from Hebrew into English, you'd have a holy day, right? So that's kind of where the original idea came from. It's a holy day. So you didn't work on that day. So it was like a public holiday sort of thing. So in the Old Testament, specifically the book of Leviticus, there are 2 types of Sabbath. There's the weekly Sabbath, and that doesn't change. That's the one that Isaiah talks about forever and ever and ever. That's the one that we see in the New Testament. That's the one we see in Revelation and so on. So that one's there, right? That's the one we see in the commandment. It specifically says the 7th day is the day that God created and rested, therefore it's a Sabbath. The annual Sabbath, so what also known as the feast days, right? So these were days in the Jewish calendar where God had placed in it was basically 7 feasts throughout, which took the whole year to get through. And there were specific days in that series that were called Sabbaths. So they were rests, right? They weren't the rest. It was just rests. And they were all to illustrate the coming of Messiah, right? So there was the Passover, there was the unleavened bread, there was the first fruits, there was Pentecost, there was trumpets, there was tabernacles, there was atonement. There's all these different rests, right? And so all of those are pointing to the work of Messiah and what he would do. And that's Jesus. And so Jesus fulfills all of those. And that's why the same reason we don't sacrifice lambs is the same reason we don't observe the annual Sabbaths, because they're one part parcel. And so that's generally seen as what we call the Mosaic law or the ceremonial law, which pointed to the coming of Messiah.
That's unreal. Robbie, we've just got one or two more questions for you, and then we'll wrap up tonight. Trent, what was another one that came through for you?
Yeah, one of the other questions that we've been hearing and been asked many times, and we've kind of had, I guess, touched on throughout the other programs, but can we do Sabbath without the God factor?
That's a good question. Well, look, the short answer is you can have a weekly day off, no problem, without God. You can do it. And some people have actually done studies on this that I've read about, where they've compared people who do take a weekly day off in sort of the same shape and form, like, a full 24-hour period. They spend it focusing on family. They do all the things without God, right? And what I've read is, there are benefits to that, 100%. But you're missing the main ingredient. Like, for example, if I had an ex-girlfriend and I decided to celebrate her anniversary every single year, but I don't ever connect with her on her anniversary, I get the benefits of the anniversary, as in I go out to dinner by myself, I get time by myself, but I've missed the point of the anniversary. Do you know what I mean? Yep. And so, look, there's nothing stopping you from doing the 7-day cycle thing yourself, and I'm sure you will be blessed by it in elements of it. But you won't get the full package without the giver who created it. Yeah,
I see you kind of lose that spiritual element that you've been sharing with us tonight.
Correct. And that's key, right? Like, it's one thing to always look at the benefits we're going to get. If I do this, I'm going to get X, Y, Z as benefits. But remember, the Sabbath it's not about benefits. There are benefits, 100%, but it's not about the benefits. It's about the person that gave the benefits. So it's about coming back to the Creator.
I just want to jump on that analogy too. I'm pretty sure if I went and had an anniversary without Aaron, I'd be in a lot of trouble. So
defeat the purpose.
It does, 100%.
If I didn't get to enjoy it as well, and I think that's where you were talking about, God actually wants to connect with us, and for us to connect with Him. Like, the blessing goes both ways. Robbie, let me throw you. There's one more question from
only
Vicky.
One.
Yeah, from Vicky watching on Zoom. If there's any more to come through, speak now, forever hold your peace. What was the essence of the conflict regarding the Sabbath between Christ and the Pharisees?
Excellent question, Vicky. I could spend another hour just on this one, but the short version is this. All right. So you got to know how the Pharisees came into existence. Basically, the children of Israel, God told them, if you turn away from the commandments, I'll step back, let you do your own thing. You can keep your idol worship, all that stuff, and you'll go into captivity of the Babylonians, which happened, right? After 70 years, they came back out of captivity. And when they came out, they were super, super zealous to not go back into captivity. And they taught their children, hey, the reason our grandparents went into captivity is because they turned away from the commandments, okay? And because they turned away from the commandments, they forsook the law, and it was all bad story. So for almost 500 years, the history had been passed down. You better keep the commandments or we'll go back into captivity. And the problem had been that after the Babylonian captivity, it was Medo-Persians, and after Medo-Persians, it was the Greeks, and then it was the Romans, right? So they have never experienced life without being in captivity. And they keep putting it down to, we're not keeping the commandments. So what the Pharisees ended up doing, and look, I'm not a Pharisee, I'm not a fan of Pharisees, but I understand why the Pharisees' mindset developed. Because basically they thought this, in order to protect us from breaking the commandments, what we need to do is put some fences around it so that we'll run into the fence before we get to the commandment and break it. So here's some fences. on the Sabbath, you can only walk 1 mile. On the Sabbath, you can't lift your mattress. On the Sabbath, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And they created all of these fences around the Sabbath so that in theory, nobody would be able to break the Sabbath because they'd have to get through all the fences. So when Christ shows up, he says, the contention, specifically to the question that Vicky's asking, the contention was, or the conflict was, is that the Pharisees were focusing on trying to protect this thing that nobody was experiencing. And Jesus comes along and says, no, I am the Lord of the Sabbath day, and it was not made as a burden for man. It was a gift for man. And so he's trying to break down this idea. Listen, I gave this to you. I mean, go back to the anniversary analogy. Imagine you're in a relationship and your significant other says, hey, let's celebrate our anniversary. And you're like, I've got to make sure I don't miss it. And you spend your whole time having all these rules to make sure you don't miss it, that by the time it comes, you've missed it. Like the spirit of it, you've missed it. And so there's that, at the essence, that was the contention between what Christ was teaching and opposing. Because like, look at what Christ did. He's like, there's someone in need of healing. I'm going to restore him today. And today's the Sabbath. I'm going to do it because it's about me being restored to my people. The Pharisees are like, you got dirt and spit and mixed it together and made mud on the Sabbath. You broke the Sabbath. And Jesus is like, you guys have lost the plot.
Yes.
So it's really, really simple if you get a bit of the cultural background and the history for it. And again, look, I'm not a fan of the Pharisees, but I understand why they got to that mindset.
Absolutely. Robbie, thank you for addressing that question from Vicky. Here's one from Lizzie. Why was Sabbath changed to Sunday, and who authorized it when God himself said it should be kept or observed forever?
I think that's from Lizzie, I think. I'm trying to see her name here. Lizzie. Excellent question, Lizzie. And again, another hour on this one, but here's the essence of it. There's no record of the seventh day being changed to any other day in the Hebrew text or the Greek New Testament. Now, despite what people may think, I've studied this, right? People have told me, oh, no, it was changed at this time by the apostles. It was changed by Paul or this or that, blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you this. We're going to give you away this free book in just a little bit. It's called The Sabbath Gift of Faith Experiment. In the back of this, there's an appendix where I wrote this book, by the way. In the back of here, I actually put some research on this very question. And I've got in here when the Sabbath was attempted to be changed from Saturday to Sunday. Because if you look, when I first started this story of my faith experiment, 9 out of 10 Christians would tell me that the Sabbath you should be keeping is Sunday, right? Now, I've only been talking about Saturday, the seventh day, this whole talk tonight. But most people think that it's Sunday. And the reason for that is that there has been an attempt to change, distort, disrupt, disturb, what do you want to call it, the seventh day into another day. And it's not just the first day. The first day is probably the prominent one. There's been other attempts as well. But the short answer is you want to get today's giveaway, this book is going to answer that question in there for you specifically. But I don't want to leave it hanging because I know people are probably asking. The really big reason is that basically there was out of this what's what I'm looking for? Out of the desire to bring together the pagan world and the Christian world, there was an attempt to basically align pagan days of worship with Christian days of worship, and we ended up with some edicts being made in like the 3rd century. But every single theologian that I have studied in any Christian denomination you want to list, and I've listed a bunch of them in this giveaway book today, you pick a denomination and you go to their theologians and ask them which day is the Sabbath day according to the Bible, they'll all say the same thing. It is the 7th day. And then when you ask the follow-up question, well, why do people keep different days? They'll tell you it's because there was an attempt to change it. It had nothing to do with the Bible, nothing to do with disciples, nothing to do with apostles. It was literally political and motivations. We'll leave it at that for that.
Wow. Thank you, Robbie. I was going to also ask Robbie, do you answer a lot more of these questions in your podcast and in your Faith FM talks and stuff like that people could go to through the app and actually listen to and get more answers to these questions?
Yeah, look, on the Faith Experiment podcast, I do a whole range of different things relating to faith and exploring ancient manuscripts, right? So we look at the biblical manuscripts of the Greek and the Hebrew. I get a lot of questions submitted by listeners, and then we basically have a whole bunch of sections. We do Q&A, and some series. I did a 13-part series at one point where it was all based on listeners' questions. So whatever they questioned, sent in as questions, we did a series. Okay, this episode is going to be answering this comment, whatever the top question was. The next one's the next one. So yeah, absolutely. If you go to faithfm.com.au, look for Faith Experiment on the podcast section, or get the Faith FM app. Go to the same section. You can catch up on any of the details, the history. It's also on all the other good podcasting platforms as well.
Awesome.
So good. Robbie, just so appreciate your ability to speak to the questions that are coming in and to not be afraid of those hard questions, because I know that on our Sabbath Gift website as well, there is a frequently asked questions page, an FAQ, and that also addresses in written form a lot of what Robbie has been presenting and alluding to tonight. So we just want to talk about our giveaways tonight. There's two, Robbie, one from you and one from a listener as well in relation to the topic at hand. But please, you go first.
All right. So I have this fantastic little book. It's called The Sabbath Gift. I can't get the camera. Here we go. A Faith Experiment. And it's really easy to read. And it's basically, let me tell you some of the I've got to sell the book now. It's free, but I have to sell it to you. So here's some of the table of contents, right? So the first part is the experiment of the Sabbath. Then it's the God-given gift, the gift thread. I talk about the gift thread going through all the scriptures. Talk about the gift of time, a gift of rest, gift of community, a gift of creation, a gift for eternity. We talk about how it's going to be kept for eternity. A gift for today. That talks about how to put it into practice today in the modern world we're living in. And then I talk about the Sabbath challenge. So I share my own experiences in it, and then I challenge you as the reader to go through and do the challenge yourself. And then I've got a little section here. I love this section. The internet's top 10 questions about the Sabbath gift. So these are some not objections, but like questions like some of these listeners have been asking. Like one of them was like, is there any other religions that have the Sabbath? I'll give you a clue. The Chinese. But anyway, let's keep going. And then I've got a section here, the Sabbath in Scripture and the Sabbath in language. This is fascinating. The Sabbath is mentioned in numerous languages for the seventh day. So anyway, if you want to get this great little book, we're going to throw it up on the screen now. You need to text in a code word. So you take out your phone, you open up your texting app, you send a text message to 0488 45311. That's the Faith Experiment number, 0488 45311. And then you're just going to send a message. And the message just has to say the word Sabbath, nothing else. Don't say please, thank you, really enjoyed your amazing conversation. No, none of that stuff. Just text in Sabbath, 0488 45311. There's an SMS bot. It's not a human. It's a bot. And it's going to ask you for your name and your postal address. And then we're going to get this sent out to you absolutely free as a thank you for you tuning in tonight, and also for you to dig deeper. And one of the cool things here, if you want to go back to me for a second, I want to show you something. At the end of each chapter, there's a section called the Sabbath Challenge. And there's a specific challenge for you to put into practice based on each one of those chapters. So you don't want to miss out on this. It's a great book, even if I write it myself.
I love that. Thank you for sending that out for free as well to our listeners. I think it's such a privilege to receive a resource for free that you don't even have to pay for postage for. So really appreciate that. That's a way that people can continue their Sabbath challenge.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Robbie, thank you for your presentation tonight. One of the other gifts that has come through from one of our listeners. So if you are watching this from the Geelong area in Australia, the pastor of the Geelong church, Pastor Jeremy Totuati, sorry if I mispronounced your surname, but him and his wife do beautiful Sabbath gift candle boxes. And so if you live in that area, jump onto our Sabbath gift website and shoot us an email via the contact us page, and we will get a Sabbath gift candle box, which is a really lovely family tradition to light a candle that kind of reminds us to slow down and be present. And we are just, really wanting to be able to give one of these candle boxes to someone who's viewing here tonight. I love these lucky door prizes. I think it's an amazing opportunity. As well, on our website, you will find some information there about the Sabbath Challenge. And so the Sabbath Challenge is all about what, Trent? We've been doing this for the month of July.
We have. So yeah, for the month of July, we've encouraged every one of our listeners to take up this challenge, to take 24 hours from Friday to Saturday, Friday night to Saturday night, where they just take a break from work, from shopping, from media communications, just to disconnect from pretty much the busyness of the world, and to actually take time away from that and just relax, rest. And as we've learned tonight, we can, do the things of like reading a book, writing, going for bushwalks, getting out in nature. We can spend that time with at a picnic with family and with friends. And we've even discussed earlier tonight about the importance of it being beneficial to others. So like visiting lonely people or people that might be sick and unwell. But as we've also learned tonight, the significance of the spiritual connection with God. And so to visit a Sabbath keeping church, and we actually have to admit, while we're here in New Zealand, in Christchurch, we were like, well, hey, is there a Sabbath keeping church close to us? Because we're going to go to church tomorrow and we're really excited. So we've used the link on the website to find our local that we can actually walk to tomorrow. So we're excited to meet new people tomorrow while we're actually going to this Sabbath keeping church. So we would encourage all of our listeners, if you want to find a Sabbath keeping church where you can meet people who have been doing this and receiving a blessing and a benefit, go here to this QR code or to the link and find your local.
Absolutely. So guys, thank you so much for journeying with us. We have loved seeing all the comments come through from broadly across the division. This has been so well represented tonight amongst our viewers. Robbie, a huge thank you to you. Viewers, if you would like to learn more about the Sabbath, please contact us on our website, and we would love to help you on your journey in taking that Sabbath challenge beyond the month of July.
Yes.
And we do trust that as you taste God's gift in the Sabbath, that you will see indeed it is good. So thank you to you, Robbie. Really appreciated your time tonight. So to our viewers, remember there is a candle box that is free for those in the Geelong area. There's one of them tonight. If you would like to jump onto our website and contact us, we'd love to get one to you. And Robbie, if people would like to get your free book, and there's no limit on those copies there, so let's put that number back up on the screen for people to text into.
Remember the code SABBATH.
And this is to get Robbie's The Sabbath Gift book, which is a faith experiment. Such a privilege to have that available tonight to our viewers.
So thank you all for joining, and we hope you will be continually blessed by keeping the Sabbath challenge.
Awesome. Good night, everyone.
See you guys.